Present your bodies a sacrifice, living, hallowed, acceptable to God, your spiritual service, and be not conformed to this age, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, unto your proving what is the will of God, the good and acceptable and perfect. Welcome to True Magic, the podcast where we are learning to do spiritual service with our physical bodies by learning about the spiritual meaning encoded into the physical forms of creation. And today, we are going to be wrapping up some topics that we left hanging during this season, as well as answering some questions from listeners. Our focus is now heavily on application of the principles that we've learned, on knowing how to actually live out some of the trickier elements of the symbolism of clothing. That means both right now, but also especially with an eye to the future, to reform, to improvement, to incremental advancement. How can we live out the creational and scriptural language of clothing, and how can we get more fluent at speaking it in the future?
The first thing we should tie off is how clothing might change with seasons of life in a more liturgical society, which is, of course, the sort of society we want to move toward. We left this dangling in episode 11, explaining the problem without giving a very clear solution.
Well, in fairness, I did say, basically, that scripture indicates we should wear haircloth for fasting, and especially for seasons of mourning. It's just a hard thing to grapple with. But this was just one instance of a larger pattern which I think we should be working toward in our society, where clothing communicates more than it currently does. And this fundamentally goes back to the concept of placekeeping. Clothing is really all about placekeeping in a sense, in one way or another. Immodesty is a failure to keep one's place, but this can be expressed in clothing either through grasping to display what is not our place, or refusing to display what is. It's easier to see that dressing like you're above someone else or revealing things that others ought not to see is bad. And we also get that dressing slovenly for a wedding, for example, is a kind of immodesty as well. But there are more subtle ways in which our clothes don't properly reflect our place. And this is largely not because we are being immodest necessarily, either intentionally or not, but because society itself has become so fragmented and disintegrated that we don't have any ways of expressing these things anymore. We don't have sufficient commonality in how we think of our lives together, and so we've lost a common language for parts of those lives that were once considered important. Or to put it another way, we've become so individualistic that we don't think we have any obligation to fit in to the body politic by sharing that much of ourselves with others.
One example is mourning, but there are many elements of social place that we could be expressing and would be natural to express in a more coherent and integrated social body. For example, are you married or unmarried? In all societies, it is important to know this to avoid offense and to smooth social interactions. That doesn't mean you have to have a uniform for it, but something more noticeable than a wedding ring is certainly helpful. It is common in many societies for married women to veil themselves and for virgins to wear their hair more freely, and this makes good sense from a symbolic perspective. It doesn't have to be a veil, of course, there's no biblical requirement for something like this, but something in the hair does seem to be quite a common token for cultures to use.
Or another example would be, are you poor or wealthy? Because if you're wealthy, why aren't you wearing better clothes in keeping with your station? Or are you young or old? And it's not about identifying people's age, it's about expressing your level of maturity appropriately through your clothing. It's natural for young boys, for instance, to wear very bright-coloured, expressive shirts. You know, we're talking about little boys. But it would seem to lack gravitas for a grandfather to wear the same thing. Or it's natural for a woman in her 20s or 30s to wear a beautiful ball gown, but you would need a different style for a woman in her 50s or 60s, or you'd feel a bit ashamed for her, trying to pretend that she hasn't aged, while a teenager in the same dress might look like she was just trying much too hard and even being a bit slutty. And just as our bodies change with age, so should our clothing. There are seasons of life, just like there are seasons of the year.
There is definitely something I would like to see in older women, and that is a greater expression of beauty and personality. Our culture obviously has very severe problems with how aging women are viewed and how they view themselves. And I really love it when I see an older woman who is wearing something that shows kind of any form of personality almost. Something that's pretty, something that's bright, something that's cheerful, something that just isn't a reflection of a desire to hide and become invisible and, not show your tummy and be comfortable and safe.
You say not show your tummy, you're saying that they should?
No, I'm not saying that grandmothers or indeed anyone should be wearing midriff tops. I'm saying that there is a certain point of life at which, if you age in the traditional Western way these days, which is to become wider, your clothing choices tend to go from the temptation to show off your body to the temptation to pretend you don't have one because you don't like the way it looks. And rather than perhaps putting in the hard work to exercise, although even that doesn't always work, just sort of wear something very, very bland that will cover it up, that no one will look at you. Something in very safe, sensible colours and very shapeless and boxy, and you don't have to think too much about the fact you have a body because you don't like to think about it. Like, this is a temptation, and I absolutely get it, but it is very lovely to see an older woman who is wearing something graceful or sassy, or how would you say?
Sassy might not be quite the right way to go, but
fun.
Something that has some personality.
Something that makes her still look like she is a woman.
Yeah, something that still expresses who she is without just completely muting.
And she's not just sort of a generic faceless person.
Yes.
I work at a cafe and we see women come in all the time, and just very occasionally someone will have, worn a cute little floaty scarf and a brooch and have her hair done in a fancy way, or maybe even wearing like a cool hat. And it's always, you really notice it.
Yes, it's actually possible to show that you have developed a mature taste in clothing and have learned how to wear clothing well, rather than to completely obliterate the concept of clothing and essentially just wear
sweatpants and sweatsuits, kind of.
The industrial clothing equivalent of a burqa.
Kind of, yeah. And if you think about watching a period drama, sort of a Downton Abbey type thing, the older women tend to look really quite elegant and beautiful in a way that women often don't today, because they were expected to, in a sense, keep up appearances. And obviously that could be crippling and burdensome in its own way if it's taken to extremes. But they were still able to maintain the love of colour and texture and silhouette into old age. And I think that's quite nice. And I'm sad that we've lost that in society.
Yes, they've gone from being elegant and exhibiting their own sort of gravitas and beauty and have just become sort of beige.
Yes, sad beige grandmas.
Sad beige grandmas. Well, I don't want to go too much further in terms of application on this particular point, because clothing is a language, and languages, can't really be prescribed. We aren't the French dictating every word that you're allowed to say and what counts as French and what doesn't, because languages develop organically in response to the needs of people to communicate. So what we're really trying to do is actually draw your attention to the need to maybe communicate these things that we're not currently communicating, and giving some general guidelines based on symbolism and how the language of clothing works. That's all that we can do. We're not some sort of post-millennial fashion designer / pope.
Well, another thing that you left hanging last episode in a kind of similar vein was the idea that robes might fit into the clothing of the future, at least in some sense. Would you care to expand on that?
I will give 2 principles that convince me that robes are not just a thing of the past, but actually ought to be drawn back into our modern or future language of clothing here in the West. Firstly, we know that God made us to sense with our bodies the goodness of the patterns that we put on our bodies. For this reason alone, we should take garments like robes and cloaks seriously as garments. The creational symbolism of these things and how they interact with our bodies, how they feel, has not changed. We know this because they continue to be extremely important elements, very potent symbols in fictional depictions of glory. Kings and wise men in movies wear robes. The Jedi wear robes. Warriors wear cloaks and capes. And superheroes. These aren't accidental tropes. They really couldn't be any other way. The fact that they only work in fiction at the moment is really just a sign that fiction is actually now more real symbolically than our own society is. But that is something that we need to fix. It can't continue forever because it's false. These are obviously visually glorious, and they feel glorious to wear, these garments.
Yeah, this reminds me of what C.S. Lewis wrote in The Last Battle. He said, "In Narnia, you're good clothes whenever you are uncomfortable ones. They knew how to make things that felt beautiful as well as looking beautiful in Narnia, and there was no such thing as starch or flannel or elastic to be found from one end of the country to the other."
In fairness, elastic can be pretty handy, but notably, kings and queens in Narnia did wear robes and cloaks and things, and clothes should look and feel beautiful, as they did in Narnia. And anyone who has worn a good cloak knows that it is a uniquely glorious garment, and nothing else can express glory in the same way.
This is true.
So there is this creational logic, the general revelation, that I would point to in arguing that we should seek ways to bring back these kinds of garments in ways that are not LARPing, but they are fitted to the person and the occasion. The second thing, though, is scriptural, special revelation. I showed last time that robes are commended as the uniform of heaven, so to speak, which means that in a well-formed church, a church that has been able to settle fully into the biblical model, the ministers would wear robes. But another major principle of true magic has been how worship doesn't just happen on Sunday. We serve God in all our lives. Like, that's what we open with every time. And the Lord's service really just sets the pattern for our life service. Sunday worship is a microcosm of life, and it's natural that the patterns of Sunday worship will tend to flow out into our lives over time. Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples. And because of that, Christians take food every day, and when they have given thanks, they eat it. We say grace because Jesus teaches us how to say grace in the paradigm meal, the Lord's Supper.
We'll have so much to say about this next season when we start looking at food.
Indeed. But for now, my point is simply that if robes are normal in worship, and worship normalizes life, then robes are going to inevitably become normalized in life. The only way that doesn't happen at some level is if worship becomes this weird, self-contained, ritualized thing that's completely abstracted from the rest of our lives, which would really be to say that it stops being worship. So I'd say that these are the two drivers that God has built into the world, one creational, one religious, that will inevitably move a Christian society towards robes being a normal thing to wear in certain contexts. And that will inevitably have follow-on effects for our language of clothing more generally as well.
This does dovetail quite well with some of the questions we've gotten from listeners, especially from our lovely Trooms in the True Magic Signal chat. One of the first ones that really strikes up against what you're saying is this. How does personal authenticity interact with what clothes are actually saying, i.e. the boots I wear to church?
Or the robes.
I mean, I guess so at some point. It's obviously hard to imagine feeling authentic wearing robes given our current language of clothing. But eventually, such a thing could be possible. I mean, it has been before, it can be again. And it's all on a spectrum, so even your choice of boots means something. And there is sometimes a tension between clothes that express who you are, or think you are, and clothes that express your place in the larger body.
Because we often feel a tension between who we are inside and who other people say we are outside, what we want to do and what the body says we need to do.
Yeah. But to answer the question, at least broadly, I do think the language of clothing will become more liturgical, more conscious, and more godly. Unity in Christ will not negate individual expression or cultural differences, so a believer in Kenya will probably still dress differently to a believer in Sweden. But there will be a commonality that develops in how we think more about integrating clothing and liturgy, regardless of those cultural differences.
This is not actually an idle question for me, because I have struggled specifically to find liturgical boots. I have some nice hiking boots that I generally wear just as a kind of general footwear, and they've actually received quite a few compliments because they're quite good-looking boots, but I struggle to justify wearing them when I lead worship. They just don't seem appropriate. But the only other boots I have are these quite dressy, somewhat uncomfortable things, sort of a square-toed, shiny Chelsea deal in dark red leather. And they have the right level of formality and quality and so forth. They are what I actually wear, but they just don't feel very me. I have yet to find boots that hit both notes, feeling authentic to me while also being suitable for leading worship. And, shoes are even worse. I don't even really wear shoes, so they don't feel authentic at all. But I think that a lot of this desire for authenticity is actually just vanity. It's an unwillingness to submit our preferences and perceived identity to what is fitting to our place in the larger body.
Just as an aside, that brings up an interesting question. When you were a wee Catholic boy and your priests were wearing robes, what did they wear on their feet? Are there specific liturgical shoes?
I seem to recall that our priests wore just regular black lace-up shoes like you'd wear in a business context, but okay. I don't recall specifically. With great accuracy, I may be generating a false memory there.
Kind of seems like the Pope should be wearing some kind of, white
I bet he's wearing
slippers
sneakers
or something.
Under there. Nice comfy shoes that you can't see under the robes.
Well, there's one benefit to robes, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your wedding dress, if it's long enough, you can wear whatever you want.
Mm.
Along a similar line of thinking, we have another couple of questions that I think reflect basically the same concern. So the first is, are you familiar with the Peter principle? It fundamentally teaches that one gets promoted to his level of incompetence. This is true. Think of The Office.
Certainly experienced this.
Right. Hearing you guys talk about desiring things, I think it is safe to say, like with the Peter principle, that one can fall into the pit of desiring things beyond their threshold. Can one say it is possible that one can acquire possessions beyond their coveting limits to where it becomes idolatry? In other words, there may be less disciplined individuals regarding certain things who should not acquire certain positions, at least not until they are ready in some cases.
Another listener writes along similar veins, so let's say we have rightly recognized that we are actively despising our blessings as a culture, that we have the highest ability to produce clothing, yet wear pathetic mass-made garbage. So instead, we want to use the blessings God has given us. We take more care in our clothing and appearance. Now, all of a sudden, we are conspicuously opting out of the norm. Is this wrong if the norm is so slovenly?
Right, so basically, is there a danger of becoming vain and greedy? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that seems like that's the short answer there is yes, obviously.
And also, could you end up just looking like a vain weirdo? Also, yes, I mean, you could. So I think it has to be a gradual thing. You push the envelope just a tad. So maybe not try to upgrade the fabric and the design and the level of formality and the tailoring all at once. But fortunately, well, sort of fortunately, it's an indication of a fragmented society, but it kind of works in our favor here. Modern society has so many fashion subcultures that the norm for everyday dressing already comes in a variety of flavors. So if you dress better than the average schmuck, you're not necessarily going to be viewed as being, vain and silly. You're likely to be just kind of pigeonholed as someone who's into vintage stuff or whatever, and labeled a kind of harmless, eccentric hobbyist person. The aim is still to dress appropriately for the occasion, just to do it well and thoughtfully. So there are times when a t-shirt is the correct uniform for a man to wear. That's fine. Just make it a well-fitted, clean t-shirt of a good quality fabric, not one of those cheap ones that's cut off grain so it hangs all weirdly and stretches out around the neckline after one wear. Maybe a flattering colour. Maybe not a corporate t-shirt advertising a high fructose corn syrup product that you don't even particularly like,
I think we can actually go further than this, though.
Okay.
I think that you can upgrade the fabric and design and tailoring all at once and often dial them right up to 11. And actually, all you'll get is admiration. Like, it doesn't have to be a t-shirt. It could be a kind of historical Jacobite shirt, and people would just be like, hey, that's a cool shirt. So I'm speaking of general life, not situations that call for more specialized clothes. But I think it's generally possible to wear the best clothing that you can, find natural fabrics, custom designed, even hand-tailored and fitted if you can afford it, and not call a lot of attention to yourself. It really just comes down to finding a design that isn't wildly anachronistic and avoids excessive formality. And I think this is easier for women than for men. There are lots of lovely dresses, whether historical or modern, which you can wear without looking like you're LARPing. For men, shirts are easier than pants, I think. You can get plenty of both historical and modern shirt designs that don't look out of place in everyday life. But I also think good jeans are actually still one of the better options for men's pants, because dressier options often do look very formal, and other casual options can be pretty sloppy. But there are definitely options out there, and they don't have to make you look like an urban cowboy. You just have to be willing to invest the time and the money in actually getting them.
And that can be a gradual process of improvement. You don't have to go from an all-cheap, mass-produced wardrobe to an all-expensive, hand-tailored one overnight. You can start with just looking for natural fabrics and good designs and decent construction the next time you happen to be shopping for clothes, and try to sort of make it a habit and see where it takes you. It's like improving anything in your life. Slowly, incrementally. Also, thrift stores are your friend.
Yeah, and having just said, you can actually dial directly up to 11 and no one's going to have anything but admiration for you. I'll emphasize what you just said now to kind of walk that back a bit, because while it's true that you could do that, I think that anyone in principle can. In practice, going from 0 to 100 overnight is generally a very bad idea. There's basically nothing in life that works well that way. You can't make major changes instantly, and when you try, it ends up being performative and weird.
They say never to wear a new outfit the first time to the occasion you bought it for. Because the first time you wear a dress, the dress wears you. You have to be comfortable in it. You have to sort of own it. You have to be able to move in it and not feel just like, this is a new dress, this is a new dress. And I think probably for men, if you're used to dressing in this very casual, sloppy way, it would be doubly so, because you could feel like a real weirdo, You
can't help becoming conscious about your appearance, and that tends to lead into pride and vanity and also insecurity.
Yeah, so wear it at home for a few days.
And you'll inevitably end up making immature decisions as well, and regretting them, and then you have to walk them back, or you'll start getting blown about by all these new ideas, and you just don't want to be a hasty person. Scripture has a lot to say about hastiness. People are trees, and trees that grow too fast have weak wood that snaps under pressure. So trying to grow really fast seldom works socially either, because people who know you well will generally see it as phony or faddish, and they tend to respond with scorn or concern or confusion.
Or crab bucket mentality.
Crab bucket mentality. Get back down here, crab.
I mean, because we do have such a fragmented society, a lot of people have to learn the hard way about fashion mistakes because they don't have a mum and aunts and people who are sort of giving them
They have YouTube.
gentle, kind feedback. Yeah, well, it's the thing people are often turning to, like subreddits. Like, there are all these...
They have us.
You send us all your outfit photos and we'll tell you if they're great. No, but there are subreddits just basically devoted to, is my outfit okay? And people, usually fairly nice. But of course, being the secular internet, you might not necessarily want to get all your opinions from people with no modesty standards or, whatever. But if you can find a curated list of friends who you think dress well and just say, hey, is this weird? Nothing wrong with that. We can probably all think of people with social media platforms who started off small and then as soon as they got big, they started dressing and even talking differently. And it just comes across as really fake and affected, as performative, as you said. Clothing shouldn't be performative. It should be a reflection of convictions about glory and beauty and symbolism and the image of God that we have grown into and learned to live out.
We have another question here which also gets to the issue of how we develop our language of clothing and how what is fitting changes over time. But this one is retrospective, looking back on the development of pants as something that women can wear. So a listener writes, we've established that pants are women's clothing now, but at one point they weren't. How do we handle changes in the clothing language like that? How do we know when something that at one point was bad word no longer is?
It's a good question. I think it kind of answers itself if you just run with the language analogy. So how do we know when an actual word is no longer a bad word? Well, the first thing is to establish whether there's any definite scriptural prohibition on it, because if there is, it doesn't matter what the culture says about it. I would put bikinis in this category. Biblically, they're just nudity, really. So even if lots of nice, demure Christian women are wearing them and saying it's appropriate clothing for the context of being in the pool, it's professional. We professional swimmers who must wear a bikini, otherwise we will ruin our careers. Tough luck. It's not okay. Just as if lots of nice, demure Christian women are taking God's name in vain, the Bible says you can't. Doesn't matter what they say, you just can't do it. But suppose it's something the Bible doesn't specifically condemn. Well, how do you know if a word like that is okay now? You look at who's using it. Is it being said only in subcultures that you wouldn't want your kids being part of? Or is it being used freely and casually, not to shock or provoke, just as a normal part of language, by intelligent, godly people in whatever context it might come up, be that academia or the pulpit or the business or the gym? So with clothing, it's just the same. The next step is to look at the culture wearing it. Who's wearing it? What are they wearing it with? What are they doing while they're wearing it? Is it criminal? Is the item being sold in a variety of stores to people of a variety of ages and incomes, which kind of tends to indicate that it's been sort of melted into this melting pot of generic mainstream fashion, which, if you're really into fashion, you probably find very frustrating and annoying, but it does indicate that it no longer specifically shouts a thing about your worldview in quite the same way. For example, wearing military-inspired clothes today doesn't necessarily mean that you are sort of a warmonger or a soldier or anything. It's just kind of like, oh, that style of buttons and overlaps and epaulets and stuff is kind of cool, and now people just wear it. Do you see people wearing it as they play with their kids at the park and help old ladies across the street? Or do you mostly see people wearing it on the news as they are arrested for throwing soup at the Mona Lisa or for trafficking children? So basically just context. And it's true that if you take this kind of care, it will mean you won't be at the forefront of every fashion trend out there. You also need to be aware that there are sometimes words which were genuinely okay and now aren't. And there are some bits of clothing which at one point were innocent and now may have different connotations, politically or otherwise. I'd say wearing a MAGA hat was different 10 years ago to wearing a MAGA hat now in terms of what it conveys. So you can't accept that just because something...
The swastika used to be a respected symbol too.
Well, indeed. It'll be a good long while before we reclaim that in Western society, if we feel the need,
A final question moves away from clothing to the more general concept of how we express beauty and glory in our bodies. Should we be cosmetically enhancing our glory? What about trying to look less fat, more athletic, taller, whatever?
Let's start with what aesthetics means. There is a lot of overlap between aesthetics and health. A lot of people get braces because they want their teeth to look pretty and straight and wide. But also a lot of dentists recommend braces because straight teeth are easier to clean, they don't catch mank, and a bad bite can cause genuine jaw problems and so on. Straight teeth look better, but they also function better as teeth. And that's true of a lot of things. A deviated septum is like the classic excuse for a nose job, right? But it does actually make it harder to breathe and to sleep. And we know a muscular body is a more durable, more calorie-burning, more usable body. clear, glowing skin is generally healthy skin. Symmetry and straightness in the body tend to reflect good nutrition. So one theory of beauty is that we like beauty because it reflects health. Secular scientists are always wondering why do we find things attractive? Why do we like beauty? They just don't get it. And so, the theory is, well, it shows that you're young, healthy, vibrant, able to produce children, fulfill your evolutionary imperative, And obviously we would reject a purely functional analysis of beauty. It's like very much missing the point, and especially when it's an evolutionary psychology type thing. But it is true symbolically that beauty does express health. We like both of these things because they are good, and because they are good, they reflect each other. And the opposite is also true. For example, it is a societal red flag when we start declaring to be attractive those things that are associated with poor health, like extreme thinness or obesity.
This is also surely why the weird trend of Hollywood actresses making themselves look like actual aliens has gotten so much attention. I look at those women and I think it looks gross, at least partly because it looks like they have a disease. They look like something terribly unhealthy has happened to them.
I mean, it kind of has. And they are certainly going too far. But there are many cosmetic surgeries and many cosmetics in general that do make us look more beautiful and more healthy. It's like the toupee fallacy, you don't tend to notice them unless they're bad. So people say, oh, cosmetic surgery always looks fake. No, actually, if it's done well, you look like, for example, Meryl Streep. People say, oh, she's aged so beautifully and so naturally. Apparently, she's had at least 2 full facelifts, according to people who sort of track these things on the internet. And she doesn't look artificial, I would say. I think she looks quite lovely. If you have the money, you can make it work. But my point is, some of us just don't have the same levels of health-related beauty as others. I don't just mean that God doesn't give everyone the same amounts of beauty. That's just obviously true. Just as he doesn't give everyone the same gifts of speed or strength or eloquence or financial savvy or whatever. But what I'm talking about is that our health and beauty is actually cursed. We live in a cursed world. So we have bags under our eyes or bowed legs or acne. We may just be straight up funny looking due to an accumulated bunch of genetic mutations from our ancestors, maybe due to pollution or radiation or starvation or inbreeding, whatever, way back in our family history.
Speak for yourself. I'm sure there's no inbreeding in my family history.
So I think we can all agree that ideally, the visuals should reflect the actuality. Someone with beautiful skin in an ideal world has beautiful skin because she has good genes and good sleep and good hydration and vitamin-rich foods and not too much exposure to UV radiation and a stress-free life, Someone with toned muscles ideally should have them because he has done lots of good, honest manual labor fueled by nutritious food. That is the ideal. But the question is, if you don't have the actuality, and if for some reason it isn't within your power to have the actuality, temporarily or permanently, is it a form of dishonesty or cheating to fake it by simulating the visuals? For example, if you don't have clear skin, is it cheating to use concealer in colour-correcting foundation? Or is it a step in the right direction in that you're acknowledging that beautiful skin is a good thing, axiologically, and so you're seeking to achieve that in the only way you currently can? It's a question many people have instinctive opposing reactions to. People have strong opinions about this. And that reaction varies according to social norms, including gender norms. There is a perception that women are more kind of allowed to use cosmetic enhancements than men are to a degree. So a woman wearing concealer, you wouldn't really comment on that. Whereas a man wearing concealer people would say he's vain, is weird, he's probably gay. A padded bra, maybe frowned on a little bit, maybe mocked a little bit, but not to the level of mockery a man would get if he wears one of those fake padded ab shirts. And even when you get to extreme-ish things like breast implants, I think there's still some level of stigma there for women. It's considered sort of vaguely hussy. But it's less laughable and pathetic than a man getting pec implants, would you say?
Pec implants just seem so stupid because you should just get pecs. Like, you can't increase the size of your breasts in normal circumstances, but you can increase the size of your pec.
Yeah. So people mock Tom Cruise for wearing lifts, and you can't really increase your height. I mean, unless you go full Gattaca, that's, something he was just born short. But people don't really mock women for wearing heels in general. People mock men who get hair transplants a lot, even though going bald can be kind of a pretty significant source of shame and embarrassment for men. It can be like a really traumatic thing, apparently. So that is interesting. What do you think about it? Do you think it is meant to reflect the fact that people don't think men should be beautiful, or that they should, as you say, achieve it sort of honestly by hard work, which again doesn't really work for things like height and hair?
Yeah, I think that it reflects a different standard for men because men are designed for a different purpose in general. It's seen as vain for a man to wear lifts compared to a woman because a man just is a man. He is the way he is. He doesn't need to be tall.
Yeah, and it's sort of not
which is
as important.
Actually kind of absurd in our current society where every woman out there is like, if he's not 6 foot and making 6 figures, I'm not even interested. So I don't know what to say to that.
And the idea that it'd be better to have an ugly son than an ugly daughter, if one of them had to be, because he would suffer less and it's less important kind of thing. So it's interesting. But if you are judgy about enhancement, you run the risk of being quite a hypocrite, because enhancement is already so baked into clothing and grooming. Even if you're anti-enhancement, you are probably doing it a lot, all over your body, top to toe. You're probably doing it. If you're male and you're wearing a suit, it was designed and cut to give you broader shoulders than you really have. No one's making suits that try to give you narrower shoulders. If you grew up in a culture that wears shoes, your feet have been literally altered for life into a narrower shape than God made them to have.
Especially in America. I don't even know how Americans walk on such narrow feet.
If you have a nice round head, it is probably because your mother turned your head in alternate directions when she put you down to sleep as a baby, because nurses told her to, because the Western beauty standard is to have round heads. This isn't true for quite a lot of cultures. There are various people groups who think babies' heads should actually be flat at the back. And it's not natural for them to tie babies to cradle boards to encourage flat heads. But then it's not really natural to position your baby back and forth either. It's not what the baby is inclined to do, or it would just do it. It would be natural to let your baby sleep in whatever position she wanted and just kind of run with whatever head shapes they're made. So maybe, flat on one side because she always liked to sleep on the right facing the window. But we don't do that, and no one thinks it's cheating.
An asymmetrical head. Much of the point of clothing that we've been emphasizing really is precisely that it is an enhancement. That's what glorification is. To glorify something is to bring out the beauty and magnificence that is there by adding more to it. It's not just emphasizing what is there, because it does that by adding to what is there. A gold-stitched cloak is glorious in itself, and you add it to the body to make the body more glorious, but it isn't an arbitrary glory. It's a glory specifically designed to accentuate the existing glory of the body. There's a sort of perichoresis going on, a sharing and mutual indwelling of the glory of the body and the glory of the garment.
Really, any clothing is an enhancement to some degree. The only way to present your body completely honestly, if you like, without any added glory, is to be not only naked but totally ungroomed. No shaving your legs, no cutting your hair, no plucking your eyebrows, no getting rid of skin tags or warts, no trimming your nails. Everything else is, to an extent, artificial. It's cultural. It's curating your body to express something. You could be a circus performer who tight laces into a 16-inch waist and tattoos the whites of her eyes, or you could be a suburban mom who wears flowy tops because they flatter her pear-shaped figure, and chooses flat shoes because she's only an inch shorter than her husband, and wears green because it brings out the reddish highlights in her hair. In both situations, you are adding artifice to your natural body. You are tweaking your silhouette, the way people perceive the colour of your skin and hair and eyes, how big or small you are. You are making an illusion, and in general, it will be an illusion designed to make you look better than you really are. Very few people go, oh yeah, I chose this orange top because it really brings out the sallowness of my skin. Or, I love the way the button placement on the shirt really makes my stomach poke out. Having said all this, I tend to think makeup does the same thing. It's a form of art. It's literally painting on a 3D surface. And as with clothing, there are dangers and nuances to it. I think it can be really sad, for instance, to see women from various ethnic backgrounds kind of erase the features of their ancestors in order to not look more beautiful, but specifically more beautiful like a white lady. Or sometimes you get the opposite, which is really the Ariana Grande phenomenon.
What, pray tell, is the Ariana Grande phenomenon for those of us who could not care less until it became relevant to the symbolism of clothing?
Well, let's just say that until Wicked, quite a lot of people in the world did not realize she was white. She's gone through
She doesn't sound white.
Does she not?
Ariana Grande.
Oh, her name. I thought you meant her voice. She's a singer.
She sounds Hispanic.
Well, she sometimes looks Hispanic, and she's also been known to look Asian and kind of black-esque, blackfishing they call it. She sort of has tried on various races visually.
Pretty sure that's a hate crime.
It's weird.
This is something that I want to come back to in the next episode, because there are actually some very difficult questions around just how far we can go with enhancing our glory and what principles we can use to limit what is right and fitting. How can we take these principles around clothing and extend them not just to makeup, but to any form of bodily enhancement? They must have application. So is it okay, for example, to have cosmetic surgery? Is it okay to wear lots of bling? What about for men versus women? What about tattoos? Are they beautifying the body or desecrating it? If we want to fully round out and apply our understanding of the symbolism of clothing, the language of glorifying our bodies, we need to move beyond clothing itself and investigate at least these major analogies, or find out if they are analogies.
We did consider simply doing that in this episode, but it really is moving beyond the scope we had in mind today and into an entirely separate set of questions and applications. And these deserve their own dedicated discussion, so we will be turning to body modification next time in what will probably be our final episode. Probably.
Until next time, if we have helped you, please consider supporting our work. You can head over to www.truemagic.nz and follow your nose to become a paid subscriber. And this will also give you access to our Signal chat group, which is full of lovely people with much wisdom to add to our own, and we'd love to have you join us. Either way, though, continue to present your bodies as living sacrifices, which is your spiritual service. This has been True Magic.